This is Michael Popok, Legal AF, reporting today on the sentencing of Julian Khater. Julian Khater used bear spray, pepper spray, and other chemical weapons on 3 Capitol Police on Jan 6th, which ultimately led to the death the next day on Jan 7th of Officer Brian Sicknick. Today was sentencing day, and that meant a number of victims, including Brian Sicknick's mother, his longtime companion Sandra Garza, his family members, and in a show of solidarity, Capitol Police walked over from their station, from where their posts are at the Capitol, to the courthouse to be in the courtroom to show support and solidarity for the family and to signal to the public and to this judge prior to sentencing. A sentencing decision that is made in real time by the judge in the courtroom. Not previously, not before he enters the courtroom. The Capitol Police sent the message: justice must be done. The punishment must fit the crime. And you must protect this democracy. Powerful. They didn't speak. Carolyn Edwards, one of the officers along with Brian Sicknick, who testified at the Jan 6 committee, who testified about the carnage, the battle carnage, as if it were a war, the bloody steps that she slipped in. She testified today about her brain trauma that she suffered at the hands of people like Julian Khater and the tremendous survivor guilt that she has because she wasn't able to help her fallen fellow officer, Brian Sicknick. That had a powerful impact on the sentencing judge. We know it did because he said so. For those around the world who don't quite yet understand our system of justice but are learning it on podcasts like Legal AF and in hot takes like mine, it is important to our system of justice that the sentencing happen by the judge after hearing from the victims and the families of people who lost loved ones as a result of the heinous crimes of the defendant. And for those that think, well, maybe you should just read all the memos, the sentencing memo that comes from the pretrial services, the memo that comes from the U.S. Attorney's Office, in this case, arguing for 90 months, the memo coming from the defense, arguing for 22 months time served, and the written victim statements, the victim impact statements from the mother, Gladys Sicknick, from the longtime companion, Sandra Garza, from his brothers and sisters who lost their brother. It was such a more powerful, moving, stirring moment, impactful moment to have them testified live and in court, both to look the defendant in the eye and for the judge to see it before sentencing. The judge commented about the power of this live testimony, especially Carolyn Edwards, especially his mother. He also commented that the defendant, Khater, did not properly apologize or accept responsibility, at least as the judge was concerned. Khater talked about spending 22 months in a terrible jail, meditating on this issue. He never apologized to any of the Capitol Police that were in the room, and there were many of them. Didn't apologize to Carolyn Edwards, to Brian Sicknick's family, to anyone. And as the judge said in sentencing, I found your acceptance of responsibility to be highly inappropriate and self-centered. You just talked about the impact on you. You didn't talk about the impact that what you did in taking away a life had on these other people. And for that led to the sentencing of 80 months, plus a $10,000 fine. And he was immediately remanded. He's already been in jail for 22 months, and now he's going to go back to a federal detention center to start serving his sentence immediately. Now let's go to Joe Tacopina for a minute. Joe Tacopina represents all things Trump. He represents Don Jr.'s girlfriend, Kimberly Guilfoyle, in her Jan 6 testimony. He represents Hannity in some defamation case brought by Dominion and the other voting companies. And he just got hired this past week, and I did a hot take on it, by Donald Trump to send a cease and desist letter to Simon & Schuster, the publisher, and the former Manhattan DA prosecutor, Mark Pomerantz, who wrote a new memoir that comes out next month called The People versus Donald Trump, written on the letterhead of one Joe Tacopina, which put him in a bind today because what he submitted to the judge in order to argue for his client to get a lesser sentence, He went so far as to try to argue to the judge, and listen to these words carefully. This is coming from the pen, from the keyboard of a lawyer for Donald Trump. Mr. Tacopina and his partner wrote that Julian Khater should get on the low end of the spectrum because he got caught up in mob mentality and mass hysteria fueled by the dissemination of misinformation about the 2020 election organized at the highest level. Let's stop right there. The big lie fueled about the 2020 election organized at the highest level, that's Donald Trump. So he's throwing his own client, Donald Trump, under the bus in order to shave a couple of months or years off his current client's sentence, Mr. Khater. That is breathtaking in its audacity. It's one thing to represent multiple clients, and everybody knows my position about that, which is don't conflate the lawyer with the client in our system of justice. Everyone deserves a defendant to be defended by a criminal defense lawyer, no matter how heinous the accusation. However, you also have to be consistent in your approach. You can't say one thing for one client and another thing for another client that's completely in opposite. That's completely diametrically opposed. To say in a courtroom wearing your I'm now Julian Khater's lawyer that let my guy off because he got caught up in hysteria caused by the big lie perpetrated and promulgated by those at the very top. I don't know how you can then go and try to defend Donald Trump in anything, since he's the apex person you're talking about in that statement. It just shows you, well, this is why lawyers get a bad rap. Even though I have been one for 32 years, I think it's important to note I haven't taken opposite sides and flip-flopped on behalf of different clients. But this is what happens when you have a practice like his, where he represents every facet of the big lie, from Jan 6 defendants and insurrectionists to family members of Donald Trump to Donald Trump himself. Eventually, you're going to step on your own crank, and it's going to get wrapped around your rear axle, the different positions that you're taking. I'm not sure. Joe must keep a notebook to keep track of all these shifting positions that he's taking, depending upon who he's representing. Am I defending Donald Trump on this one, or am I throwing Donald Trump under the bus to save another client? Which is it? He must have to, coach himself and brief himself before he starts his argument. So things went about the way the Department of Justice thought they would go. They asked for 90 months. The judge sentenced him to 80 months. All of the witnesses that came in, including Carolyn Edwards and Gladys Sicknick and Sandra, were very Sandra Garza were very powerful in the way that the judge received that information. And the excuse that was given by Joe Tacopina, the lawyer, and his partner for why there wasn't a more meaningful apology, also sort of rang hollow. It was, well, Judge, Mr. Khater's also being sued civilly by the Sicknick family. And what? And you can't be a human being and give a heartfelt, authentic, real apology and request for mercy because you're worried about losing whatever you think you have in terms of assets in a civil suit. I got news for Khater. You're losing the civil suit, okay? You're going to spend the next 80 months in jail. If you ever write a book, it's all going, the royalties are all going to the families, and you're going to come out and you're going to pay off by working through a garnishment or otherwise whatever judgment comes out against you in the civil side. And no amount of Joe Tacopina is going to change that. So for him to say, well, they'll use it against him in the civil suit, there's enough evidence against him already. He got criminally convicted at the highest standard of the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, for his role. You think the family's going to have a hard time in a civil context, proving just by a preponderance of the evidence, like the scales of justice just have to tip just ever so slightly for the family to prove negligence and negligent homicide and other torts of intentional infliction of emotional distress? Joe, your client's losing that case. He should have given the apology, and maybe the judge would have shaved off another 10 months. But it didn't happen because, let's be honest, that was a moment of authenticity for your client. That's how he thinks. He has no remorse, so he didn't show any remorse. And that's what happened today with Julian Khater being sentenced to 80 months and having to face the music and the families of Brian Sicknick, fellow officers and Carolyn Edwards, and a whole group of other officers that marched over from their posts to bear witness to the sentencing, and the developments in the courthouse that led Judge Hogan to sentence Khater to 80 months for his role. And for those that think, well, it was just one of many insurrectionists, the timeline proves that the use of the bear spray and chemical weapons by Julian Khater and others at that moment, within 5 minutes, the line fell. And so did almost the Capitol. And who can forget those chilling cries in walkie-talkies and communication devices for law enforcement when they said the line won't hold, the line has fallen, meaning we can't protect the Capitol and its occupants, our elected officials in the cradle of democracy, any longer. The thing that was the final tipping point for that to happen, the use of the bear spray and chemical weapons on people like the late Officer Brian Sicknick. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.